Hello, everybody, and welcome to Family Fridays, sponsored by Parent Project Muscular Dystrophy. Today, we are joined by a couple of panelists that we're going to speak about independent living with Duchenne and independent living even within your house. So, my name is Pat Moeschen, for those of you that don't know me, and I am one of the Adult Advisory Committee PAAC member advisors, and I work closely with Parent Project Muscular Dystrophy and have for a couple of decades now. I am I have muscular dystrophy, and I also have an independent life with a wife, two children, and full-time employment. So I'd like to introduce also our other two panelists now, who are experts on independent living and things with Duchenne and independent living. We have Austin Leclaire, who is a member of the PPMD Adult Advisory Committee, a good friend of mine, and a Massachusetts resident who is college educated and is living at home, but very independently. So he's going to speak to you today about how you can be independent, even staying in your own house. And we also have Gretchen Egner, parent of a boy with Duchenne, and also Connect Wisconsin coordinator, as you can see on the screen. And Gretchen is also a high school professor and a very, very long time friend as well. So we're going to kind of have these guys chat a little and hopefully give you some tips and pointers. As always, if you would like to submit a question during the Facebook webinar, you can do that live, and we'll try to answer as many as we can during our time with you today. And if you have questions later on, or you're watching this webinar not live, you're always welcome to reach out to myself or any member of the Parent Project Muscular Dystrophy staff, and we will get back to you with a question answer for your question. And if we don't know, we will find out. So I'm going to turn it over to Austin Leclaire now and let him introduce himself and tell you a little bit about his life and then how he lives independently, and then we'll get to Gretchen. So we hope you find this webinar informative and entertaining. And over to you, Austin. What's going on, buddy?
Hi, my name's Austin Leclaire. As Pat said, I'm a member of the PAAC. I've been serving as a member for several years. I'm also in college. I'm studying mechanical engineering and biomedical engineering. And I've also been on the Duchenne certification committee with PPMD. And so, as Pat said, I live at home with my family, but I do live pretty independently. So some of the things that I do independently is I go to school. So I have a caregiver, and my caregiver typically drives me to school and drops me off. And then from there, I'm generally on my own. I'm always asking other students if I need help using the bathroom or getting food. And with my experience, they've always been very willing to help. And with caregivers, so my mom has a care.com account where we get our caregivers. But I don't find the caregivers, but I generally deal with the interviewing. And then after that, scheduling when I need them to help me with certain things. And I also am very familiar with Social Security. I manage that on my own. I have food stamps, so I manage my groceries and that stuff on my own. I also have my own van, so I make payments on that and rent monthly. I also pay for my insurance for my service dog that I recently got. And some of the other things that I do is I do a lot of skiing. I do other adaptive sports such as power soccer. So lots of those, and generally when I'm going to tournaments, I generally I have a friend bring me. So from generally at tournaments, I'm pretty much on my own. I make reservations for hotels and that type of stuff.
So that's all excellent, Austin. I have a couple of just basic questions for our intro portion here before we bring in Gretchen. I missed it if you said, how old are you?
So I am 22.
Okay, so you're 22, and when were you diagnosed?
I was diagnosed at age 3. I always remember it as age 5, but it was age 3.
Okay, so you've obviously been living with this lovely condition for quite a while, and you've managed to not only maintain independence as the condition has progressed, but it sounds like you've gained independence. I will revisit a few things you said after we do our rest of our introductions, but especially about, making some reservations for places you're going to stay, some of the sports you play. It sounds like you have a good grasp on a lot of tasks that you do in the world, because at the end of the day, it is your world, right? So you have to figure out how to navigate that. And I love what you said about, asking people for help at school and things like that. So we'll get back to you in a couple of minutes. Before we started the webinar, Austin and I were chatting too. He's doing some computer programming, and he is pretty adept at that as well. So definitely, you're learning greatly how to navigate the world, which is a skill that you'll be able to use for the rest of your life. So I think that's awesome that you do all that stuff on your own. Gretchen has a different perspective, as she also is a mom of a very independent young man as well. So Gretchen, tell us a little bit about your experience, please.
Yeah, so Nick is 21. He'll be 22 in April. And as Pat mentioned at the beginning, I am a high school English teacher. And from kind of the get-go, we always, struggled a little bit with that extra piece. Nick was diagnosed when he was 2. And so even when he was walking, there were always those like extra steps that we had to make sure that he was taken care of and that he was safe. And I saw early on that he had the potential to really be coddled and stifled by not only me being too protective, but maybe there being fewer expectations for him in school based on how I worded things to the people doing the IEP and his teachers. And so from pretty early on, I tried to include him in decision making and make sure that he was asked. Like people were talking to him during his IEP meetings, and that we were not we were just trying to keep things as least restrictive as they could be for him. So to keep him safe and get him what he needed. And when he was about 15, 16, maybe a sophomore or junior in high school, we were asking him about college, and never considered that he would want to be able to go away from school, because he was always pretty quiet, reticent kid. And UW Whitewater is about 30 minutes from our house, and it is a very accessible school. And he expressed an interest in going to college and living in the dorms. And so we went, and he gets SSI, and so he has IRIS money that he can use to pay for caregivers and to work through that. So his freshman and sophomore years, he lived in the dorms, and he had to coordinate his care through an agency. And then the agency stopped going to Whitewater because of complications unrelated to Nick's care. And his best friend, who goes to Whitewater and has been his best friend since he was 3, said, well, I'll come, I can take care of you, but you should probably live with us. And so for the last 2 years, he's been living with his best friend, who has been his primary caregiver, and their other roommate, who has also been a caregiver. And when he graduates, I'm not sure yet if he's going to get an internship or if he'll try to get something that is a paid employment, but he's looking at continuing to live independently. And of course, we're a half hour away or whatever it is, we'll be able to help him. But him being able to make decisions, I think, is just critical to quality of life.
So let me ask you first, Gretchen, do you feel that the steps you took when he was very young to enable himself to own his own life have impacted the way that he is going through things now? If you know what I'm saying, because it seems like from the get-go, you were kind of like, you're going to own this and we're going to help you, but the decisions are essentially yours. Do you feel like that's led him, now that he's in his 20s, to be more equipped to deal with independent living?
Absolutely, because he does have social anxiety. He is not a naturally outgoing person. He's on Discord and things online where he has made friends and he has done those things, but he is always somebody who will stick to himself generally until he knows people. And there were times, I think, when I was really hovering on that line between helicoptering and negligence, if we're just kind of pushing him out there and try it. But when I asked him in preparation for this, was there anything that I did that you think helped you, or anything that was a bad thing? And he said that he always assumed he was going to college because he always felt he was expected to. And he, appreciated when I've been, or my husband has been there to kind of walk him through those things he's going to have to do on his own. But there definitely have been times where he has been uncomfortable because he has felt that I have pushed him and expected him to do things that he didn't feel equipped for yet.
Well, I would argue too that that's part of your job as a parent, right? I mean, aside from the diagnosis, sometimes everybody needs to be nudged out of the nest. Everybody watching this webinar, if you're an adult, think about back to your own childhood when your parents maybe made you stretch a little bit, and afterwards you look back and say, boy, I'm glad that happened. But yes, going through it might have been a little bit more difficult of an experience. Austin, I have the same question for you. Do you feel like, since your family's expectations, and that's the magic word here, your family's expectations have always been, I don't want to say high, but aside from the diagnosis, knowing your family as I have for so long, I know that even when you were a little kid, your mom had high expectations for you, and expectations that listen, Duchenne was going to be no more of a mountain than it had to be, and the expectations were put on you to not, be so enabled that you weren't able to, do a lot of the things you're doing today. Do you feel like growing up with, like, a solid set of expectations and getting nudges and pushes has helped you now as an adult?
So I think it's a combination of a few things. So my mom is definitely, so she hasn't ever expected me to go to college or get a job or whatever, but she did expect me to be just like any other kid. And she wanted to raise me as a normal child. But one of the things is, so my mom has always said, if you want to do something, you have to figure it out on your own. So, but it was a combination, because that statement is kind of dangerous because I accept it as a challenge. So so it was a good combination of my personality and my mom's parenting. So whenever she told me you can do whatever you want, but you have to figure it out, I always took that as a challenge. So I've kind of always liked to do stuff independently, and I always like to accept a challenge. So I think my mom seeing me as a normal child, like, obviously I have limitations because I am disabled, but mentally and being independent, yes, things are difficult, but yes, things are more difficult for me to do, but in the long run I can do it. So I think that it taught me to be really adaptable to different situations.
Well, and it's given you the life skill of not giving up, which is a gigantic thing that all of us need. Never mind, a diagnosis of DMD. I mean, there's times when we all want to say, this is too hard, I'm not going to deal with it. So it's good that the seeds were planted. And if you took it to mean a challenge, that's great how you reacted to it. But, I see someone who's pushing through, which, it's one of the reasons why I'm proud to know you. It's one thing that so many of us, so many of us with MD, we get labeled with this hero thing, which I think is completely false. We're pretty much the same as everybody else. We have challenges, but everybody else has challenges. So when you develop the life skills to be able to do it, it's a great thing. So you're able to be as independent as possible. Gretchen, we have a specific question coming in for you. When Nick was growing up, and Austin, you might want to weigh on this after. But Gretchen, how did you encourage Nick's teachers in school to treat him always as capable? If you have an open-minded teacher, it's easy. But there are other teachers that obviously would see perhaps pity or perhaps coddling or perhaps want to, do a different trail. And you, as an educator yourself, how did you encourage Nick's teachers to keep him going?
Well, I think that the best one was his third grade teacher, Mrs. Gorman, because he was kind of isolated and wasn't really engaging in things because he'd been protected and he was seen as different. And I don't know I can't remember the situation because it was 17 or 18 years ago, but she told him, if you want to have friends, you have to be friendly. Like you have to, you have to be nice and you have to interact with other people. And it worked for Nick. I think that helped him, but that was also an eye opener for me that I needed to pay attention to that line between making sure that he's safe and making sure that he can do things independently. And I don't know when we did the 504 plan, but that's where we had, like adaptive things for gym to make sure that he was safe with the gym things, that he wasn't expected to do those things for recess. And then when it became things for time, like taking the ACT test and whatever those other tests were that we had along the way, I had to make sure in the IEP meetings and when we would have his teacher, that would be the special ed teacher that was responsible for his IEP, that we weren't putting in things that were too restrictive, that we were focusing on, he needs more time because he legit needs more time to get from A to B. Or if he suddenly has to go to the bathroom in the middle of something, it's going to be 20 minutes before he gets back. And so I think bringing it to their attention, and then he pretty much flew on his own. I mean, I also encouraged him and talked to him to make sure that he was getting what he needed and asserting himself.
I like what you just said too about, you're educating the staff, but you're also not saying to the staff, let this go, let that go. You're basically saying this is how it's going to be, and this is what we need to do. Not excusing him from any of the work, which you and I have been in education for a long time. There are some that will do that. Just real quick for everybody that might be, watching, if they have younger kids or if they're not at the school age yet, IEP is individual education plan, and a 504 is a little bit different. An IEP may focus more upon mental or cognitive abilities, where a 504 plan that you can work with the special ed at your school. A 504 plan by law is like, hey, when this kid goes to the bathroom, it's going to be 20 minutes, or all this kid's classrooms need to be on the first floor if there's not an elevator, or this kid should have a second set of books at home so they're not carrying 50 pounds in their book bag. So 504 is more nuts and bolts with the physical stuff. And I actually have a 504 plan at my school for myself, as well, with, being able to take breaks and stuff. So it is something that, by law, as a parent going in, you don't want to be pushy about your kids' independence, but you want to make sure that you're educating, so that, everybody you touch will understand a little bit more about muscular dystrophy when you're done, and then they'll have a better idea.
And something I'll add too quickly, when you're in those meetings and you're wanting like all the support that you can get, a lot of times I've heard parents outside of the Duchenne community, but that idea that you want an aid for your for your child, and that comes from a place of safety, and you want them to be protected and to get what they need. And when he went to the high school is 2 levels and there's an elevator. And I don't know if anybody brought up an aid or having, because he definitely needed an aid to get him his lunch and give him the tray because he couldn't, carry the tray. But they outfitted a stick for him, and he still has his elevator stick and his stick that he uses to do that. And so there are tweaks that you can make to promote independence. And they would give him, I think, a walkie-talkie so that if there was ever any problem, he could alert help. But he was able to do it on his own when he could.
Well, and I think that's important too, because as teachers, we see all sorts of kids that will need assistance at school, and aides, or as we say, paraprofessionals. They're in short supply, and it's as much as you are at the table advocating for your own kid. As soon as your meeting ends, there's somebody coming in after with equal asks. So it's always good to try to be on the same side of the table, which can be intimidating as a parent if you're not comfortable with the education system, because you have, on the other side, you have a teacher, maybe a special ed teacher, maybe an administrator. So that's another thing to help navigate. But I would also say, as your child gets older, there's nothing wrong with involving them in the asks. You're not at school with your son. Your son is at school. So, I think it would be helpful for you have a conversation with your child and you say, well, okay, you know your school day, what, what's going well, what's not, or like Austin said, helping other kids, asking other kids, other guys for help, other people for help, uh, that takes away some of the plan. So when you go in, you're educating, but you're also, it's coming from the person. It's not, again, not you enabling. My son needs this. My son needs this. I mean, you're not at school with him, so you have to help with that as well. Austin, this might be more of a question aimed for you. Something else just came in on the live question stream. If anybody has a checklist to ask caregivers, questions to ask caregivers when interviewing. And I know, Austin, you mentioned at the beginning that you're very involved in your caregivers. Do you have a checklist or kind of a list of things, or what? How do you go about that?
Well, some of the things that I ask is how would they prefer to want to move me, like whether or not it's lifting. So I have multiple options. I have a Hoyer lift, I have a slide board, and also someone can just lift me. So I generally offer all three of those options and ask which way they prefer, because obviously I don't want to get to the point where, oh, this person has to get me up and they can't lift me, or they don't have an idea of how to move me. So I'm typically pretty light, so it's easy for people to move me, but I like to have all the options because if someone were to get injured lifting me, I would be at liability because I would have expected them to do something that they can't do.
Well, and that's good. Besides just the lifting stuff, let's say somebody is going to interview for a caregiver position. They come over and you sit down and you're speaking with them. Uh, what other things do you kind of ask about getting to know them, or things like that? How do you go about finding out background, and you know what do you do?
Yeah, so some of the other questions I ask is, so I have a few pets. So I like to, obviously that isn't about my care, but I make sure that they're comfortable with pets because I have a few dogs that are always walking around and I also have other pets that I need help caring for sometimes. So obviously I don't want someone in my house that's fearful of dogs. So I
What
generally
about
ask that type of stuff.
what about your brother Max? Is he one of your pets?
I guess you could say that's actually sometimes because he's a little more able-bodied than I am. Sometimes he does stuff for me.
Well, but back to the serious thing. What about, do you ask them like work experience, or if they've ever had experience with Duchenne or with moving, transferring people and stuff like that? Or do you just kind of assume that's a given?
So some of the things I also mention to them is with lifting, for example, I've noticed that most people want to grab you underneath the arms to lift you.
Yeah.
So, but the problem is with not having enough muscle, when someone grabs me there, my arms just flop down.
Sure. Yeah.
And then there's no support to lift me there. So I make sure they know to bear hug me. But also I have to let them know because my back does crack, and I have to let them know that that isn't something that's hurting me, that it's just normal because it really is just air coming out of your spine. So I'm not really too. So I have to let them know about that because in the past I've had people freak out and almost drop me because they thought they hurt me. Obviously, dropping me makes it even worse.
Right. Right. Gretchen, have you guys ever developed any sort of a checklist? I know you said Nick is pretty much with his best bud, but have you ever had to experience that as well?
We, first we went through this Society's Assets, this organization where they hired people. And so the people were already hired and they would show up. And so Nick had to quickly navigate like the language and explain what worked and what didn't work. And he always had to have a Hoyer lift. They were required to use a Hoyer lift. They couldn't do a bear hug lift or anything. So he had to abide by those things. And he does need to hire somebody else because one of the guys who's been helping him moved out, and he's still helping Nick, but he's going to be moving for sure at the end of the school year. And so he's looking to hire someone. And so we don't have a checklist. I think I'd be concerned about just kind of the background if we were hiring somebody we didn't already know. And pulling someone in. I don't know if the care.com, do you have to do any kind of like background check to get put in as a potential caregiver, or is that all up to you?
I'm not sure. Austin, do you
So
know?
for me personally, the service that helps me pay my care assistants, so they'll do a Corey check. So they'll do the background check for us.
Okay.
But with my situation, we're generally pretty open. So I'm not really concerned about necessarily background. If they can, because I don't need help with very much. So with lifting and stuff, I just have to make sure they can do that. And as long as they're strong enough to lift me, I'm not really too concerned about what their background is.
Okay.
We have a question coming in about kindergarten. And if one of the boys starting kindergarten, it says writing is difficult, holding a pencil or colored crayons. What about advice to, you know, starting school and getting the really the first teachers involved in the fact that there are going to be limitations?
You need the OT involved. So every school district, every school, there's a PT and an OT, and the occupational therapist will look at those fine motor skills, like gross motor skills too, but the fine motor skills. I think Nick had adaptable like pencil grips and different things, and they have all kinds. So the teacher can have like a bunch of them and practice and see what works. And that's where, it's kindergarten. They shouldn't be writing tons or drawing tons. It's more active. But as long as the teacher knows that if he seems fatigued, it's okay for him to stop and do less of the work. But I know when Nick was younger, he would consult with the PT every maybe quarter or so, and usually the OTs and PTs, they work in the entire district, so they're not just at the school that your child attends. And so they would come in and just consult, like, how is it working, ask the teacher how things are going, and I would get them involved in the conversation early. And like, they should be, as soon as the school knows that your child has muscular dystrophy, that OT should be part of the team that's looking to manage his care.
Right, and I would add to, seating position, seating chart, things like that, and educating the OT and PT immediately that this is a changing condition. Don't assume that the occupational therapist and the physical therapist, have experience with muscular dystrophy, specifically Duchenne, and make sure, as we all make the joke, that they don't think it's MS and that they know exactly what they're dealing with, and the fact that it's going to be an open, ongoing communication. They see things at school, they report to you, the parent. You see things at home, you report back to the team at school. Keeping in good contact is very helpful. And of course, I would say, like you just alluded to, Gretchen, take the pressure off. It's only kindergarten or first, second grade. It's not. It shouldn't have to be worries on the plate of the child for things like that. Austin, what about you? Do you remember when you were young, any things going on in school, or were you just kind of drifting along?
Yeah, so in elementary school, I had a really unique situation where my grandmother was a guidance counselor at the school. So while I was at school, I always had support and I could always go to her if I needed help with something. But because she had worked at the school, she was able to educate a lot of the school on what kind of help I need. There was one teacher at one point that told my mom I would never learn how to read. But other than that, all the teachers were generally pretty helpful. They understood the situation and were always willing to help. So that was pretty good. So with my grandmother being the guidance counselor, I'm sure it would be a lot different if she wasn't. But also at my school, my mom had educated the school as well about it. But actually, lots of times my mom would do fundraisers for PPMD at school. So I would generally help with the fundraiser. It'd be like selling the wristbands and have the donation jars. So the school was well educated on what my condition and what they can do to help me.
I also have had students, teaching at the middle school level. Elementary school, it's definitely understandable for the parents to get involved. But as far as independent living, the definition of independent living doesn't necessarily mean your own house. Independent living is you owning your own life. So as a middle school teacher, I have had parents outside of the muscular dystrophy world contact me and say, my kid is going to be in your class in grade 6. Excuse me. I'd like to come in and speak about his, her disability. And I always stop them and I say, that was fine in elementary school. However, now that your child is going to be a young adult, I'm glad to coach them on the side, but I want the child to speak to the class. And if that is uncomfortable and they don't want to come up and present, I'll present with them, or they can do a little film or something. But I try to take mom and dad out of it when the kid meets me when they're 10 and say, this is something that you're going to be doing for the rest of your life. If your condition is chronic, like muscular dystrophy, you're going to be educating everybody along the way. And your parents are not always going to be there to do it for you because you're going to be out in public or you're going to be somewhere where they're not there to speak. So I want you to address the class. And the parents always are a little nervous at first, but they've always come back after and said, that's true, that's good. And of course, elementary is different. But as the child gets older, it's important for them to do this themselves. Gretchen, I see you nodding. You agree?
I teach freshmen, a lot of freshmen, and when parents call or anything, I say, that you're always welcome to call me, but your child needs to get in the driver's seat. And especially, like when they go off their feet and they're in a wheelchair, people look at them anyway. And so for, have a voice and speak and explain what's happening. I think it's a tool. And public speaking and, speaking in front of the group, that's terrifying for everybody. And to know that you can, and that, especially in 6th or 7th grade, knowing that the teacher will help you with that. That's awesome.
Well, and again, it's necessary because it's about getting people to own their own lives. And that's really what we're trying to hammer the message home today, no matter what age. There's a question banking back on the writing, about working on handwriting and stuff like that and asking if it's necessary. I think every school district, unfortunately, in the country takes a little bit different view on that. So that would be something to work with the team. And then another question coming in is OT and PT people possibly have dropped out due to COVID concerns and stuff like that. Where would you guys, in contact with the school, how do you find how do you find other people or other people that might know about Parent Project, muscular dystrophy, PPMD? How do you connect people if your regular people are not there?
I would think that the the clinic that they go to has occupational therapy and physical therapy, so that's a tool. When you say that they've dropped out, the school district, I would think, is obligated to provide those services in some capacity, be it virtually. That's I don't know how you just don't do that. We haven't stopped providing any services because
right. Yep.
COVID.
And I would say again, this is your chance to step up and educate. And if your child is old enough, they step up and educate. I tell people every time I speak to people that I feel like, especially if it's someone I don't know, muscular dystrophy is going to come up, and I have probably 90 seconds to educate them, and then they're going to go on with the rest of their lives. So just in that quick brush, I want them to get a few things. And overall, I want them to get the big idea that in society, we still have a long way to go with the way disabled people are viewed and treated. And all of us, we have to step up and we have to continually educate. Austin, I know you said I know you're outspoken and you'll talk to everybody and you've been on a lot of panels and stuff. Do you feel the same way that as far as independent living, it's not really bragging, but you kind of are out to prove, hey, I got this. Look, I'm doing this. I mean, do you feel like in conversations that you're trying to spread the good word?
Yeah, generally, some of the issues at school that have generally come up is when I talk to people fellow students in school, when I talk to them about having to go in the hospital and stuff, to most kids, that's like a big deal. Like, you went to the hospital, what's wrong? And so they always used to feel really bad that I was going to the hospital a lot, but I was saying that it was just normal, just part of my life. Like, I spend a lot of time at the hospital, nothing bad. It's just to help with my health. But lots of times my friends would ask, are you dying from it? And I would always joke, yes, I am. No, when they would ask if I was going to the hospital, why I was going to hospital, I would say I'm dying, because just to mess with them, because I kind of have a twisted sense of humor, but I always took for granted that going to the hospital was normal. So until I was in high school, I didn't make the connection that most people you shouldn't be in the hospital. If you are, that's a concerning thing.
Well, yes and no. I mean, for other people, yes, but for you, it's part of normal. And we could argue for the next 3 hours about the definition of normal. So for you to educate people, this is the normal way that I exist, and it's not a big deal for me. Oh, and by the way, I have a dark sense of humor, and I'm going to make jokes. That is an armor that you and I share, because life has gotten so complicated and weird all by itself. Humor is the defense mechanism, and it's certainly a more healthy defense mechanism than self-harm or alcohol or something like that. So, but again, that armor of your humor, and the fact that spending time in the hospital is normal, that's all part of you having an independent life. And these are all the seeds that have been sown by people around you that have led you down this path to say, I have to own it. Okay, that's the takeaway message from today. Teach your child to own their own life. Some of you might have tuned into this webinar thinking, again, it's about building a house and making it accessible and rent. That's all nails and boards and stuff like that. This is more about your soul and how you're going to navigate the cards you've been dealt and how are you going to do it. And I would argue strongly that as you become a grown-up with muscular dystrophy, if you have the tools in place to have an independent lifestyle, you're going to be happier, you're going to feel better, and you're going to not be as much of a burden as you think sometimes you are. I, a long time ago, stopped worrying about asking for help, and I know Austin's the same way. You need help, you ask. Nobody minds. You got to get rid of your pride. And for Gretchen, how do you feel as a mom? And we're going to wrap up in a minute here, but how do you feel as a mom of a child with Duchenne, where they're out the door? I mean, they're really not home. I mean, how does that affect you? Do you worry often?
I've told him that he is always welcome to, like our door is always open if he wants to come back and live at home because our house is accessible. But I do worry, but he doesn't text me every day. He doesn't call me every day. And I like to think if there was a problem, he would. His very first night at Whitewater, he was in a summer program, and it was the first time he'd used the Hoyer lift, because we'd never used the Hoyer lift before. We always just lift him, and we took it because the aides had to use it, and it was stuck and they couldn't get him down. And he called the RA, and the summer RA didn't know what to do. So he's like, naked in the sling or whatever. And the RA had to call the public safety people from the university. And this would have been Sunday night. He told me about it Friday when I picked him up. And, and I'm like, you didn't tell me this? This wasn't a crisis? He's like, well, it happens. They got me down. It was okay. And so that just kind of taught me that if there's a crisis where he needs me, he's going to call. He's going to text if he has a question. And, he's going to be okay. He's in good hands. I trust his friend, and I trust him that if he's in a dangerous situation, he's going to, put a stop to it or let us know.
Well, and how great that that's not a crisis in his mind. I'm sure there are people watching this webinar right now that when you tell that story, they were thinking crisis, and realize that the person with the muscular dystrophy might not be in crisis mode. They're like, yeah, this is my life. But like Austin, you said, okay, I'm going to the hospital again for this maintenance of them. It's not a crisis. It's just part of our thing, right?
Yeah. And I'd add quickly too that it's important when they're young that we teach kids empathy. And, we can sit and cry in our beer all day long that the dreams and hopes we had for what parenthood were going to be like didn't, it's different, and feel sorry for ourselves and our kids. But everybody has problems, and everybody has struggles, and ours are serious. But once you realize that, like, nobody gets out of this alone, it's easier to bear what you have and make the best of it.
Well, at the end of the day, you don't really have an option, because right now we still don't have a magic pill. So here we all are, right? And we're floating around, and now we have to figure out how to do it. So without the other options, if you're going to choose to figure things out and be happy or be miserable, it's an easy choice, Yeah. So closing thoughts from either of our panelists before we wrap things up.
So I think another really important thing is, as we're talking about independence, if some really don't want to be independent, it's always good to encourage independence. But I feel like some people just that's not their personality trait. So if people really don't want to be independent and want help from someone, I think you should also be willing to do that, because as I experienced with my brother Max, he isn't the same as I am. So we know that he's not going to be as independent because he's not really outspoken. So we know that he's always going to need help and he's always going to need support. So that's what I think is important to also remember, is it's not just parenting, it's also your personality, and every person's different.
Yeah, good message. Professor Egner.
Well, I completely agree. Everyone's situation is different. And we can definitely do things to foster that, not just independence of living on your own, but just decision making. So that even if you don't want to live in an apartment on your own, you don't want to separate from your parents, you still can make your own decisions. If you want to do something that like isn't what your parents want you to do, you can assert yourself, and that you just have that quality of life, and that you can enjoy yourself and do what you can.
Absolutely, and it connects to the webinar yesterday on handling your finances and managing your money. This is all something that everybody can take care of. Doesn't need to be a gigantic sum of money, but to understand how things work from yesterday's webinar. And this is something that we're going to revisit in the future, the independent living. This is certainly not a one-time conversation, because as you go through the different stages of your child's life, it changes, and the definition of what independent living is may change. So feel free to submit any questions if you're not watching this live, or if you have a thought after you watch this in a few hours or something like that. We'll get back to you with an answer, and if we don't know one, we'll find one out for you. But I want to again thank Parent Project Muscular Dystrophy for sponsoring these Family Fridays. We hope that you found today's very useful and informative, and I especially want to thank Gretchen and Austin for giving up their time today. And yeah, we'll see you next time. So thank you very much, everyone. Enjoy the day and make it a great one. Thank you.